With the Persian Gulf closed, 9 to 13 million barrels of crude oil vanish from global supply lines every 24 hours. The math compounds daily. Since the conflict started, the world has lost a cumulative 1.25 billion barrels of undelivered crude. We are past the point where the last tankers loaded before the war reached their destinations. The global economy is now forced to rely entirely on stationary terrestrial stockpiles. The global economy is starving of its primary fuel source. This reality is being masked only by burning through finite reserves that cannot be replaced. There is a disconnect between supply and daily life. At the pump, prices remain stable, creating an illusion of normalcy despite millions of missing barrels. Heavy consumption sectors like aviation and commercial trucking continue to operate at full capacity, behaving as if the shortage is a brief interruption rather than a systemic failure. By failing to adjust consumption to match the physical reality of the market, the world is moving toward a mathematical cliff. Two temporary measures are currently holding back the crash. The first is a massive release from the United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The U.S. is a net exporter, which means it doesn't actually need its emergency crude. Instead, it is diverting up to 2.5 million barrels a day across the Atlantic to keep the European economy afloat. Because European infrastructure is significantly more energy efficient than the American model, this influx is just enough to plug their immediate supply gap. This solves the immediate problem for Europe, but it relies on bleeding a finite geopolitical safety net that will eventually run dry. In Asia, the situation has forced a different kind of intervention. China is executing a massive industrial pivot to prevent its manufacturing and petrochemical sectors from seizing up. The pivot involves removing naphtha, a key oil byproduct, from their industrial process and replacing it with highly processed liquefied coal. Converting coal to liquid is inefficient, expensive, and drives heavy pollution. In a throughput-driven economy, however, the priority is keeping the factories running at any cost. This is supported by the large-scale adoption of small electric vehicles. Because the Chinese power grid runs primarily on domestic coal, this provides an additional buffer against the crude shortage. But there is a timeline problem that these hacks cannot solve. Even if the Persian Gulf reopened tomorrow, it takes months and sometimes years to physically restart the shuttered oil fields. Neither American reserves nor Chinese coal can alter the underlying physics. The global supply chain is broken, and a crash is now a matter of time. The calendar is the final constraint. By late June or early July, global inventories will reach their absolute physical limit for operations. At that point, raw feedstock stops flowing into refineries. Without feedstock, the production of all oil-derived products comes to a halt. This level of disruption mirrors the shipping collapses of World War II, when the tanker fleet was being sunk faster than it could be replaced. By midsummer, the crisis shifts from a series of mathematical deficits into a physical shortage that will affect half the globe. The crisis will eventually be resolved through a brutal economic process called demand destruction. When supply stops flowing, prices skyrocket until the product becomes entirely unaffordable. Demand is destroyed because people and industries simply lack the funds to consume. Northeast Asia faces the most severe impact. They import over 90% of their crude, and almost all of it comes from the now isolated Persian Gulf. Europe is the next most vulnerable region. While they are also dependent on imports, they have limited access to alternative supplies from North and West Africa. The impending crash is not a temporary fluctuation, it is a permanent realignment, where the market only finds balance through forced economic pain.